My brother framed me at work while I covered his mistakes, so I exposed him publicly and took the promotion he thought was guaranteed. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and for most of my career, I've always tried to support my younger brother, Ryan, even when it hurt me professionally. From the moment he joined the company a few years after me, I could tell he was struggling with things that came naturally to me. Simple reports, spreadsheet errors, forgotten emails, stuff that barely took me a minute, would throw him off completely. And every time he stumbled, I found myself quietly cleaning up after him. I told myself it was just what older brothers do. I was protecting him, shielding him from embarrassment, keeping him from making the same mistakes I'd watched other colleagues punished for. Our parents didn't exactly make it easy. They always painted Ryan as this special kid with a creative streak, someone who could do no wrong. Even though I worked my ass off, there was this unspoken expectation hovering over me. I had to cover for him, compensate for his shortcomings, silently balance the scales. It felt unfair sometimes, but I rationalized it as family loyalty. After all, he was my brother, I owed him that much. At work, I stayed late more nights than I could count, fixing errors nobody else saw, taking the blame quietly when necessary, and jumping on extra projects just to show competence. Meanwhile, Ryan coasted along, charming everyone with a smile, appearing effortlessly capable. I'd catch him leaning back at his desk, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the chaos I'd just cleaned up. And yet, I couldn't stop myself from helping. It was exhausting, draining, but I convinced myself it was worth it. Still, little things started cropping up, tiny inconsistencies in his work, offhand comments from colleagues, emails disappearing. I noticed, of course, but brushed them off. Ryan was just a little messy, I told myself. Harmless flaws. Nothing I couldn't handle. But that nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach kept growing, like I was overlooking something I shouldn't. And deep down, I had no idea just how badly this imbalance would explode. Things started shifting in ways I couldn't ignore. Ryan began taking credit for small wins at work, little things I'd actually done. At first, it was subtle, a client compliment he'd casually pass off as his own idea, a spreadsheet update I'd completed that he mentioned in a meeting without a nod to me. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach every time I heard him speak. It wasn't just frustrating, it was unsettling, like someone had quietly moved the ground beneath me. I tried to chalk it up to sibling competitiveness. Maybe he was ambitious, and maybe I was just too sensitive. But there was something else, an edge to his smile that didn't belong. One afternoon, our manager stopped by my desk and asked, "Hey, did you handle the Henderson report?" There were a few inconsistencies. My heart sank. I'd proofread it twice, triple-checked the data. I quickly realized it had been Ryan's section that had caused the issues. I swallowed my frustration and said, "Yes, I'll fix it right away." I went home that night feeling drained, knowing I'd once again silently clean up after him. Meanwhile, colleagues started noticing changes too. Someone whispered as I walked past, "You're always saving the day. Ryan's lucky to have you." Lucky? I clenched my jaw. They didn't know the half of it. Ryan's casual charm and effortless smile were drawing attention, while I quietly labored in the shadows. I wanted to speak up, to assert myself, but I hesitated. Family loyalty, guilt, the fear of rocking the boat, all of it held me back. There were moments I caught him smirking at something I'd done, like he knew exactly what I'd just fixed. My gut twisted every time. I began realizing that this wasn't just minor oversight or sibling carelessness, there was a pattern forming. And the worst part? I couldn't yet see where it would lead. That night, as I stared at my laptop late into the evening, the unease grew heavier. I had a sinking feeling, like standing at the edge of a cliff, not knowing when the fall would come. It happened again. Another critical project, another deadline, and once more, Ryan left me scrambling to fix things he should have handled. This time it was a client presentation with high stakes, numbers that, if wrong, could cost us the account. I found errors he'd made in formulas, missing data, and misrepresented information. My chest tightened as I realized I'd have to redo hours of work overnight. I muttered under my breath, "Why does this always fall on me?" But there was no one to answer, no one to intervene. I stayed late at the office, fluorescent lights humming above, the hum of the city outside barely penetrating the quiet of my cubicle. Every keystroke felt heavier than the last, my eyes stinging from fatigue. By midnight, I'd corrected every error, rebuilt every slide, and triple-checked the data. Only then did I allow myself a tired sigh. Ryan had left hours ago, carefree, oblivious. The next morning, I presented the corrected deck to the client, pretending nothing had gone wrong. "Thanks for putting this together," the client said, smiling. I nodded, hiding the exhaustion and irritation simmering beneath the surface. Meanwhile, Ryan strolled in, acting as if he'd contributed equally. I clenched my jaw when he casually remarked, "Glad you handled the tough stuff." "Yeah," I thought bitterly, I handled it again. I started noticing a pattern: the bigger the stakes, the more mistakes he left for me to cover. I questioned why I always believed it was my responsibility. Was it loyalty? Guilt? Or fear of what our parents would say if I let him fail? The thought nagged at me, twisting like a knot in my gut. And yet, despite the frustration, I couldn't stop helping. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself he just needed guidance. But deep down, a growing unease whispered that I was being taken advantage of. And that whisper was about to grow into something impossible to ignore. When the announcement came that a senior promotion was up for grabs, I felt a mix of excitement and exhaustion. I'd spent years working late nights, taking on extra projects, and fixing mistakes that weren't mine. This was supposed to be my moment, the acknowledgement I'd been waiting for, the reward for all the sacrifices I'd silently made. I pictured myself finally stepping into a role that reflected my dedication, that validated the endless hours I'd poured into the company. But Ryan, as usual, seemed to sense the stakes before I did. Suddenly, he was extra charming with our boss, laughing a little too loud at his jokes, complimenting work I'd actually done, and casually dropping hints about his own leadership experience. At first, I tried to shrug it off. I told myself my results would speak louder than his flattery. But the tiny seed of doubt planted in my chest began to grow. Small things started happening, emails I'd sent, never received, minor mistakes magically showing up in my reports, tasks being reassigned without my knowledge. One afternoon, my manager called me into the office. "I noticed a couple of inconsistencies in your recent project. Can you explain?" My stomach sank. I triple-checked everything, yet suddenly the errors looked like they were my fault. At the same time, colleagues were starting to comment, almost innocently, on how Ryan seemed to have everything under control. I could feel the tension building like a storm behind my ribs, a quiet panic I couldn't shake. Even as I tried to focus on my own work, I noticed Ryan smirking at his desk, fingers tapping lightly on the keyboard, completely unaware, or maybe too aware, of the chaos he was orchestrating. By the end of the day, I sat in the empty office, fluorescent lights flickering overhead, wondering if my years of dedication were about to be overshadowed by his manipulation. The promotion I'd envisioned suddenly felt out of reach, and for the first time, I realized the fight was bigger than I had imagined. And the worst part? I wasn't sure yet how far Ryan was willing to go to take what I deserved. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of day that feels like it's already stacked against you. Ryan had been helping me on a major client file, but this time it wasn't small errors or minor oversights. He left critical mistakes in formulas, mislabeled charts, and misfiled data that could ruin the presentation. I didn't notice everything until I tried running the final review, and my heart sank. This wasn't just a mistake, it was deliberate. The next morning, our manager called me into the conference room, frowning. "There are serious inconsistencies here, and I need answers." I tried to explain, but the documents were already flagged, and the trail looked like it led straight to me. Ryan was there, sitting innocently with a coffee in hand, smiling as if nothing had happened. "I don't know what went wrong," he said casually. Maybe a miscommunication. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, almost mocking. I felt my chest tighten, a cold mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. I couldn't believe my own brother could do this. How had it come to this? Every instinct screamed that he'd set me up to take the fall for something he knew full well he had caused. I left the meeting feeling exposed and humiliated, replaying every interaction, every helpful suggestion he'd made. Later, I cornered him in the break room. "Did you do this?" I asked, my voice barely controlled. He smirked, sipping his coffee. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he said. "Maybe you just missed something." His casual denial hit me like a punch. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him admit it. But instead, I walked away, fury and disbelief coiling in my gut. By the time I got back to my desk, the office felt colder, smaller. I realized something terrifying. Ryan had crossed a line I hadn't imagined, and for the first time, I understood the full scope of the betrayal I'd been ignoring for years. And in that moment, I knew things were about to get much, much worse. I've never felt so small in my own life. By that Friday, the humiliation from the frame-up had spread like wildfire. Whispers floated around the office, colleagues glancing with pity or curiosity, and my manager's emails grew sharper, questioning my reliability. Every corner of the company felt like it was closing in, and I couldn't breathe. I kept replaying the events in my head, every late night spent covering Ryan's mistakes, every time I'd sacrificed sleep and sanity for the sake of his convenience. And now, it was as if all that effort had evaporated, leaving me standing exposed and powerless. I sat at my desk staring at the screen, the fluorescent light above flickering softly, my coffee cold and untouched. The spreadsheets I'd painstakingly built over weeks suddenly felt meaningless. Ryan strolled past, humming, completely unaware, or deliberately oblivious, of the storm he'd unleashed. I clenched my fists, jaw aching, chest tight. My mind kept asking the same question: how could he do this? How could my own brother betray me so openly, so efficiently? That night, I drove home in silence, rain streaking my windshield, city lights blurring into a mess of color. Every traffic light felt like a reminder of the dead ends I'd hit, the choices I hadn't seen coming. At home, I sat in my dark apartment, shoulders slumped, staring at my reflection in the window. I felt alone in a way I never had before. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it cut through the bond one thought we shared, leaving a hollow ache that refused to go away. I couldn't sleep. Thoughts circled endlessly: what if this ruined my career? What if Ryan kept getting away with everything while I was left scrambling? My confidence, pride, and sense of self-worth felt shattered. I realized then that this wasn't just a professional setback, it was personal, a deep wound that had been festering for years. And as I sat there, staring into the dark, one thought kept echoing in my head: I can't stay a victim. Something has to change. The next morning, I walked into the office with a new mindset: I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. Sitting at my desk, I started piecing together every mistake Ryan had made, every slip he'd left behind, every time I'd covered for him while he smiled and took credit. I opened folders, dug through old emails, and quietly asked colleagues about small inconsistencies they might have noticed. Each piece of evidence felt like a brick I could use to build my case. I knew I had to be careful. One wrong move and it could backfire, making me look petty or desperate. So I kept everything subtle, documenting every error, every miscommunication, every instance where he tried to shift blame onto me. I even started taking screenshots of emails, timestamps, and task assignments. The office hum faded into background noise as I meticulously plotted my next steps. During lunch, I confided in a trusted colleague. "I think Ryan's been manipulating situations for months, maybe years," I whispered, barely looking up from my notes. They nodded slowly, eyes widening. "You have proof?" they asked. I only shook my head. "Not yet." But the feeling of control was intoxicating, the first spark of hope in weeks. By mid-afternoon, I realized something crucial: Ryan's arrogance was his weakness. He had been so careless, so confident that I wouldn't notice, that he left a trail too obvious to ignore. If I played this right, I could expose him without risking my own reputation. And maybe, just maybe, I could reclaim what he tried to steal from me. Sitting there, staring at the screen, my hands hovered over the keyboard, ready to start gathering every shred of evidence. The fear and despair from earlier in the week were still there, lurking in the corners of my mind, but now they were accompanied by determination, a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in months. But even as I plotted my moves, a small voice whispered, "This is bigger than you think. He won't go down without a fight." I thought I knew the full extent of Ryan's carelessness, but that afternoon shattered that illusion. While reviewing old expense reports and project files, I stumbled across something that made my stomach drop: a series of unauthorized reimbursements and small, deliberate alterations in financial documents, essentially, embezzlement. My hands shook as I scrolled through line after line. This wasn't just laziness or incompetence. This was calculated, deliberate sabotage and theft. For a moment, I froze, staring at my monitor. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears. Everything I had endured, the humiliation, the frame-up, the endless nights fixing his mistakes, suddenly made sense. His charm, his casual smirk, the way he always seemed untouchable, it had all been a mask for something far more malicious. I had underestimated him, and now the stakes were exponentially higher. I leaned back in my chair, letting the reality sink in. I could report this immediately, but if I acted without strategy, I could be the one under scrutiny. I realized that my comeback had to be precise, calculated, and public enough to leave no room for doubt. The mid-level missteps I had been documenting suddenly became powerful leverage, but the embezzlement gave me the ultimate edge. I spent the evening organizing every shred of evidence: emails, spreadsheets, screenshots, and witness statements. I even secretly approached a senior manager I trusted, asking hypothetically how situations like this could be handled. "Documentation is everything," they said, almost casually. But to me, it sounded like a roadmap. As I closed my laptop, exhaustion and adrenaline warring in my chest, a dangerous thought crept in: Ryan was about to find out how much I'd uncovered. And if he realized how close he was to exposure, there was no telling what he might do. I sat in the dark office, city lights casting long shadows across the floor, and whispered to myself, "This isn't just about proving him wrong anymore, it's about making sure he can't hurt anyone else, and I won't let him get away with it." The following week, I moved with calculated precision. Every meeting, every email, every interaction was deliberate. I quietly gathered all the evidence I had compiled: errors, screenshots, financial inconsistencies, and organized them into a single, irrefutable dossier. I double-checked every detail, knowing that one mistake could make me look petty or vindictive instead of professional. Ryan, oblivious as ever, continued to swagger around the office, his confidence a dangerous kind of arrogance. I started subtly testing the waters with colleagues I trusted, hinting that discrepancies in past projects might need a second look. Their reactions were cautious, curious, but most importantly, they validated what I already suspected: no one had realized how extensive his manipulations had been. Each confirmation felt like fuel, strengthening my resolve. I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in weeks, the first sense of control since everything had started unraveling. When I finally arranged a meeting with a senior manager, I framed the situation professionally, calmly stating, "I've noticed multiple inconsistencies over several projects that I believe need formal review." My hands were steady, my voice measured, even as my heart raced. The manager leaned forward, intrigued, asking for details. One by one, I presented the evidence, never raising my voice, never letting emotion cloud my delivery. Meanwhile, Ryan, as usual, acted casual, leaning against the counter, coffee in hand, smiling like he had nothing to worry about. That smugness would soon be his undoing. Every screenshot, every timestamp, every altered spreadsheet I had painstakingly gathered painted a clear picture of his negligence and deliberate sabotage. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner and the faint clatter of keyboards outside. By the time I finished, the weight in the room had shifted. Eyes widened, subtle nods exchanged, and Ryan's confident grin faltered just a fraction. I felt it, the first tremor in his carefully constructed facade. And even though nothing had been officially announced yet, I knew the next meeting would change everything. The day of reckoning arrived. I walked into the conference room where the leadership team, HR, and Ryan were all waiting. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady as I laid out every piece of evidence I had collected. Emails, spreadsheets, screenshots, everything was presented clearly, meticulously, leaving no room for excuses. The air was thick, tense, and electric, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Ryan leaned back, arms crossed, wearing that same smirk he'd relied on for months. I met his gaze steadily, refusing to flinch. "I've compiled a timeline of project errors and financial discrepancies," I said, letting the words hang in the room. "I want to ensure the record is accurate and all accountability is clear." His smirk faltered slightly, just enough to reveal the panic I'd been waiting for. As I went through each example, the reactions around the table changed. Colleagues exchanged subtle glances, murmurs filled the edges of the room, and the manager's frown deepened with every slide. Ryan opened his mouth, ready to deflect, but every claim he tried to make was contradicted by hard evidence. The confidence he'd worn like armor cracked visibly, his posture slumping. By the time I finished, the room was silent, the weight of truth hanging heavy. HR nodded to the senior manager, who finally spoke, "We'll need to investigate these findings formally." Ryan's face paled. The smirk was gone. He sat frozen, realizing he had underestimated me, that all his schemes were now laid bare. I leaned back slightly, my chest tight with adrenaline, but a quiet satisfaction simmered beneath it. The humiliation he had planned for me had backfired spectacularly, and I had remained calm, professional, and untouchable in the process. Even as I packed up my notes, I caught Ryan staring at me, eyes wide, unblinking, a mix of fear, shame, and disbelief. I didn't need to say anything. The message was clear, I had won, and he had no defense left. But as I left the room, I couldn't help the small, uneasy thought flickering in my mind, this isn't over. There's still one final step. By the next morning, the shift in the office atmosphere was palpable. Whispers no longer carried doubt, they carried respect, and in some corners, awe. Ryan was still at his desk, pale and tense, typing furiously, probably trying to rewrite the narrative in his mind. Meanwhile, I received a call from HR and the senior manager, my promotion was official. I felt a rush of vindication so powerful it left me momentarily breathless. All the late nights, all the sacrifices, all the times I covered his mistakes, it had finally paid off. Colleagues stopped by, offering congratulations, shaking my hand, some even confessing they'd suspected Ryan's manipulations but hadn't known how to approach the situation. I smiled politely, but inside, the satisfaction was quiet, almost private. This wasn't about gloating, it was about reclaiming what was mine, proving to myself that I could stand my ground and play the game on my terms. Ryan tried to approach me, a hesitant, awkward smile plastered on his face. "Look. I'm sorry, okay?" "I didn't mean," I cut him off silently with a nod. There was no apology that could erase the months of betrayal, no words that could fix the humiliation. I realized something important, my victory didn't need confrontation. My success, my reputation restored, was enough. That evening, as I sat at my new desk with the promotion letter framed on the wall, I felt a strange mix of relief and empowerment. The anger and resentment that had weighed on me for months had started to fade, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and clarity. I'd fought a quiet battle, and I had won without stooping to the level of deceit and sabotage that Ryan had relied on. And yet, as I looked across the office at him, demoted in the eyes of everyone around us, I knew the story wasn't just about professional triumph, it was about the boundaries I had finally drawn, and the lesson he would never forget. But the final chapter wasn't written yet. Settling into my new role felt surreal. The promotion wasn't just a title, it was validation of every long night, every sacrifice, every moment I'd doubted myself. My desk, once cluttered with rehashed reports and corrections, now held a sense of authority and calm. Colleagues approached me with respect, and for the first time in months, I felt genuinely seen. I'd stepped out of the shadows Ryan had forced me into, and the difference was staggering. Ryan avoided eye contact now, his arrogance replaced by cautious humility, or perhaps fear. He still passed by my office, but there was no smirk, no casual dominance. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The knowledge that he had been exposed and my reputation intact was enough. I'd learned that boundaries weren't just lines on paper, they were shields. And I was finally strong enough to enforce them. As the weeks passed, I reflected on the journey. The betrayal had cut deep, both professionally and personally. But it had also forced me to grow, to strategize, to recognize my own value and stand firmly for it. I realized that the most satisfying victories aren't about revenge, they're about reclaiming your power with dignity. Every late night, every moment of frustration, every time I held my tongue to strategize, it had all led to this. I made peace with the past. I still cared for Ryan as my brother, but I understood now that family loyalty didn't mean self-sacrifice to the point of ruin. I set firm boundaries, refusing to cover his mistakes ever again, and he eventually adjusted, learning a lesson he couldn't ignore. Sitting back in my office one evening, the city lights casting a soft glow through the window, I smiled quietly. The storm of betrayal had passed, leaving a calm I'd never thought possible. I had won, not just professionally, but emotionally. And the final, quiet truth settled in my chest: sometimes, walking the path of patience, strategy, and dignity is the most devastating form of justice. I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving.